Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Navigate with Naisha. Today, we're going to be having our first video on AP Pre-Calculus, and we're going to learn about Unit 1, positive and negative intervals, and increasing and decreasing intervals. So, let's get started. First, let's look at positive and negative intervals. So, when we talk about positive and negative, what we're referring to is the y value of a point. We call a point positive if its y value is positive, and a point negative if its y value is negative. So this is the point that we're going to be looking at today. As we know, on the x-axis, if a point is above the x-axis, it has a positive y value. While a point is below the x-axis, it'll have a negative y value. So if we look on our graph, we have to look at the point. If we're trying to find the positive interval, we have to look at the part of the graph that is above the y-axis. So, over here, if we can see, any place above the y-axis is between A and B. So, let's write this down. Our positive y-axis, our positive interval of our graph is between the points A and B. So to write this down in interval notation, we'll write from A, comma B, it is positive. Remember that these are parentheses, not brackets. It is not brackets because brackets means that it is a closed interval, and it's not closed because at point A and at point B, our point is neither positive nor negative because it is 0, which is not a positive number. Therefore, it has to be an open bracket or a parentheses. We can also write it in a different notation. This notation is called interval notation. We can also write it in a notation called inequality notation. To write an inequality notation, we have to do the same thing by noting the endpoints, but we write it in a slightly different way. So, because we start at A and we end at B, we're going to write these at the end. And because what we're talking about right now is the x values, as although we are looking at the y values, we're writing it using these x values, x value at A and the x value at B. So we'll write A is less than x is less than B. And notice that here I didn't use a greater than or equal to sign. I didn't do this because, again, this should be an open interval notation. So, this is how you write it in interval and inequality notation. I'll have another video coming shortly about interval and inequality notation as well as set notation, so we can go more in depth on this. Okay, so now let's look at negative. So the point on parts of the graph that are negative are the parts that are below the x-axis, where the y value is negative. So here it will be at this part and this part of the graph. So let's write this. Again, using interval notation, we're going to be writing it. But notice that our part that is negative is split into two different parts of the graph. We can't write this in one interval notation. We'll have to use two. So in order to do this, let's use interval notation. Because our graph is going to negative infinity and positive infinity by the x, then we're going to have to use those numbers. So let's start. In interval notation, we notice that when it's negative, it keeps on going forever in this direction. So it should start at negative infinity. But remember, negative infinity is not a number, and neither is infinity. Therefore, we're going to be using an open notation because it's not a number that you can reach. Negative infinity, comma, A, because it's negative until it reaches A. Then it becomes positive again because it's above the x-axis. Remember that we are keeping this in an open bracket. Now, because we have to create a new equation right here, which starts at B and then goes until positive infinity, we have to join these two. So we're going to join it by using this union sign. This union sign basically means or. And we'll see this when we write in an inequality function. Remember, if you use an infinity sign, it always has to be an open bracket. Now, you can write positive infinity, which is an okay way to say it. Infinity and positive infinity is saying the same thing. It is not something that you need to say. Okay, next let's talk about inequality function. So, since we're going from negative infinity to a, as we wrote right here, let's do the same thing. Negative infinity is less than x is less than a. But now, instead of the union sign, we can't use union sign when we do inequality functions. So here we're going to write or. Or, and then over here, let's write the same thing in inequality function. B is less than x is less than infinity. Pay attention to the fact that I didn't use a greater than or equal sign, just like over here, because it's in open brackets. It's in open parentheses because we can never reach negative or positive infinity, and because over here at these points, it is neither positive nor negative. Now let's move on to increasing and decreasing intervals. Okay, now let's focus on increasing and decreasing intervals on a parent function. So here we have a graph and we have our x values c and x value d. So as you can see here, this c value is at this point and this d value is at this point. So when we're looking at increasing and decreasing intervals, we're looking at the slope of our graph. Remember, slope is denoted as m, which is the rise over the run, or the change in x over the change in y of the points of a function. So now, when we're looking at increasing and decreasing functions, we have to take note of whether the slope is positive or negative. If a slope is positive, then it's an increasing interval. If the slope is negative, then it is decreasing. Over here, let's note where the values of the slopes. So, at this point of the function, until it reaches c, we can see that the slope is increasing because the change in y over the change in x is positive. As you can see here, this is a change in y, and this right here is a change in x. So we can say that this has a positive slope. This is the change in y, and this is the change in x. Now, in this part over here, from c to d, there is a negative slope. And from d to infinity, there is a positive slope again. And we know it's going to infinity because there are arrows. So now let's write this again. And again, we're going to be using interval and inequality notation just like we did on positive and negative intervals. So let's start with our interval notation. For increasing, our function is increasing on the intervals over here that we noted, wherever our slopes are positive. It's increasing on the intervals negative infinity to c as well as d to infinity. So let's write this down. So we're going to write an interval notation first. So from the x value is negative infinity, which of course is an open bracket because we can never reach that number, until c, as well as d to positive infinity. Note that I use the union sign to connect these two equations because they're separate. And so now it just means this or this is where it's increasing. And of course, I use an open bracket or parentheses whenever I'm denoting the infinity sign because you can never reach that number. And when we're reaching c and d, a similar case as we had in the positive and negative intervals, there c and d is where the slopes are equal to 0. And then when the slopes are equal to 0, the slope is neither positive nor negative. Therefore, it is neither increasing nor decreasing, which is why we have denote it with an open parentheses. So let's write the same thing in inequality notation. So from negative infinity is less than x is less than c, or d is less than x is less than infinity. That's where our interval is increasing. Again, I didn't use a greater than or less than equals to sign because it's an open parentheses. And I used or to connect them instead of union because it's inequality notation. Now let's do the same for negative. So let's denote this like we did over there. This is where our graph is increasing. And now let's look at where our graph is decreasing. Again, this is where the slope is negative, and we wrote this right here. So, where the graph is decreasing, and let's write this in interval notation first, is from the point C to D. Remember, this should be an open interval because C and D has a slope of 0, and therefore it's neither increasing nor decreasing. It's just a space in between C and D where it is decreasing. And now, let's write it in inequality notation, where we write C is less than X is less than D. We write it this way, where C is less than X is less than D, because any place where X is between C and D is where it is decreasing. So we're ultimately saying the same thing here, it's just written in a different way. And here we won't have to use a union or sign because our points is not separated like this. But remember, if a graph is asking you for an increasing or decreasing interval or a positive or negative interval, and your graph is split like this, and here it's asking you for a negative interval, make sure to put both the intervals because it's not asking for just one. Because both these intervals are wherever it's negative. You can't just pick and choose. So again, this is how you do positive, negative, and increasing and decreasing intervals. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. And remember, I'll be making a video soon about the types of notation, so we can go over that more in depth. Interval, inequality, and set notations, so you'll have a more in-depth understanding of that. Feel free to take a picture of this screen as it is a good reference. Stay tuned for upcoming videos and let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. Thank you for watching.